about Carcel. Let's talk about style in The Things They Carried, a short story by Tim O'Brien. It's also the name of a novel by Tim O'Brien, and this short story is really a chapter from the novel. Now, the reason I want to talk about style is that Tim O'Brien has done something very unusual here, the way he puts words on the page. So that's his style. The words he chooses and the order he puts them in, kinds of sentences he uses, that's all part of his style. So what is his style? When you read the story, the main thing that jumps out at you is that he has these super long lists of equipment. Here's a little quote. The things they carried were largely determined by necessity. Among the necessities or near necessities were P38 can openers, pocket knives, heat tabs, wristwatches, dog tags, mosquito repellent, chewing gum, candy, cigarettes, salt tablets, packets of Kool-Aid lighters, matches, sewing kits. It goes on. And the question is why? Why does he choose to list all this stuff? What effect does it have on the reader? Because I can promise he didn't just do this by accident. It's a technique. It's a device. So why is he using this technique? Why is he creating this device? Well, what happens as you read this? I think as you encounter the first one, you think, well, I'm supposed to read every single word of this. And then you encounter the next one and you think, I might be skimming a bit. And you get to the next list and you think, oh, good grief. Is he really going to do this again? And yes, he is. I think part of his reason for doing this is to elicit exactly that response in you, the reader. As we read, we think, I can't take this. This is so burdensome. This is so boring. There's so much stuff. I don't even want to think about all this stuff. And isn't that exactly the soldier's experience? This whole experience is so tedious. The whole march is so boring. He's got all this stuff. It's a burden. It's a burden to read. It's a burden to live through. Of course, much more of a burden to live through. This gives the reader a taste of what it's like to be in Vietnam, in the war as he was, through the style. So the style actually helps put the reader into the scene. It helps us suffer the way that the soldiers are suffering. And when I say boring, I want to go back to that word. He talks about the marches as being boring, the lugging their stuff around. He calls it humping their gear, their backpacks, all the equipment. A lot of times nothing happens. They don't even know exactly what they're doing. They're just marching from here to there. And that's part of the soldier's experience. Of course, there's also death. One of the soldiers under his watch dies, Ted Lavender. There's also some firefight exchange. We understand that that's part of their life too, but day to day, moment to moment, a lot of it is just repetitive and tedious. One day looking very much like the one before and the one that comes after. And the tediousness of these lists kind of embodies the tediousness of the life of the soldier. So burden, tedium, annoyance, it's all there on purpose. Okay, so we have the lists and these long paragraphs and long sentences that just go on and on as the time for the soldier seemed to go on and never end. Another stylistic thing that Tim O'Brien is doing here, he uses a lot of military jargon. And of course, that makes it seem realistic, yeah? Like he says SOP, standard operating procedure, but he doesn't explain what SOP is. He figures you can, find that out, and if you don't know, well, too bad. It doesn't really matter that much if you don't know the names of guns, not just the M16 that maybe we're hearing about in other places, but M60, M79, and lots of gear and stuff that have acronyms. He puts that all in there. And I would say that he does that to give a sense of realism and also to show his credibility as an author. if he uses that terminology effortlessly, then he comes across as someone who knows what he's talking about, which he actually does because he really was a soldier in Vietnam. So, yes, it's full of military jargon. Another choice. Another thing he does, and this I think is the most interesting, besides the lists, besides the military jargon, you have the plot structure. This story is not set up in a straight line. Most stories that are traditionally structured will have a beginning, middle, end, and you'll have events kind of like little pearls on a string on a necklace, one and another, and they all lead very neatly, causally, one to the next. That is not this. The things they carried is more circular. It's more like one of these like slinky or curly Q plots, because think about just the element of Ted Lavender. The first time Ted Lavender is mentioned, it's very offhand, like, oh, and Ted Lavender, who was scared, was carrying this much weight when he was shot and killed. Okay, so there's a little reference. And then we go on to other things, but then we come back to Ted Lavender. The next time we hear a little more about how he died. And then we go to other things and we circle back around to Ted Lavender again. And we get even more information about the fact that he was probably on tranquilizers when he died, exactly what he was doing. He was peeing, he was zapped while zipping, as, using euphemisms to cover up the pain of loss. That is, using funny phrases to try to cover up how painful it is. But Ted Lavender and his whole story does not get revealed except in little pieces deployed across the story until the end we really understand what happened. Normally in a plot, we would just go through in a straight ahead way and be told exactly what we need to know to understand the next section. But this is all, circling back and circling back. Same thing with Martha. We get reference to Martha in the very first sentence, these letters that Lieutenant Cross carries. And later we understand even more about Martha and their relationship, or really the lack of relationship. That maybe they went out a couple times. She still writes to him mainly so that he won't lose hope. And, she may feel a sense of obligation, like, well, I don't want to abandon him. He's over there fighting a war and all this. He knows she doesn't love him, not really. But she's kind of his coping mechanism for surviving this war. She is a psychological rest for him and a healing thought for him. And these letters help keep him sane. Now, of course, eventually he burns the letters, and we could talk about that. What does that mean, that he's cut himself off from the thing that keeps him sane? Who will he be now without that support, emotional support? But looking at the plot, we hear about Martha right in the first sentence, and then we hear about her again, and then we circle back to her again. And just like Ted Lavender, we eventually understand the full importance of Martha. And of course, the climax of the whole story is the letters being burned. But this circular style, this wheeling away and then circling back, is an interesting choice. Tim O'Brien plays with form in a lot of the other chapters of the novel, the things they carried. And he asks himself, how does a person tell a true war story? And he struggles with how to actually convey truth. And he even says that fiction can tell the truth better sometimes. And maybe part of what he means is that you can structure it to be more reflective of the soldier's experience, kind of like the lists are, but also reflective of how memory works. As he looks back at his time in Vietnam, you do look back and you remember a person, and then you remember some other stuff, and then that person comes back to your mind, and maybe this time with a little more background and detail, and you tease out more and more as you remember further. The circular plot feels kind of like how memory works. It also feels a bit like how regret works, that when you look back at something that you're not especially proud of or that you're conflicted about even, it's hard to face the whole thing just in one piece. So you remember certain parts and you have to circle back to it later because then you're ready to confront some more parts. The death of Ted Lavender, we really don't see in full until later because finally we're ready and the narrator's ready. And so confronting difficult episodes of our past, it just needs more of this circular approach. This maybe it's kind of like a whirlpool where we're getting closer and closer and closer to the center of things. But to get to that center, we have to circle around it for a while and just carefully make our way into the heart. I think that's part of what Tim O'Brien is doing here with the structure of the plot. So it reflects memory, it reflects confrontation of pain. Yes, it is unusual and I think quite effective. Well, you may also have ideas about the style here, the way Tim O'Brien puts words together, puts the whole plot together. You could leave those in the comments if you like. I'd be curious to know what you think. Join me for another video soon.